Hi, and welcome to episode 14 of the SU Coaching Podcast. My name is Anna Manning, and this is going to be a bit of a personal one for me today. So, I talk a lot about how to deal with that critical voice, that critical narrative that we sometimes hear inside our mind, and that is a bit different for everyone, right? Some people it's really pervasive, some people it's not as bad. For some people, it's like a worrying, nagging voice. For some people, it's just a really harsh, critical voice, and it's something that they hear all the time. Now, this is something that I've had a lot of personal experience with, but also it's something that I coach a lot on. And one of the reasons I think that I coach on it all the time is because when that critical inner voice is allowed to just run rampant, it is disastrous for confidence. And because I'm mostly a confidence coach, the people that I work with often have a really critical voice that lives inside their head. That narrative that they hear often, usually, is pretty harsh, has pretty high standards, doesn't let anything slip, ruminates over things. And as you can imagine, if you were being criticised constantly by like a boss or by someone in your team, it would have an impact on your confidence. And the same thing is happening to you if this is you. So if you've got quite a critical internal narrative, it is having an impact on your confidence. It will be having an impact on your confidence, right? How could it not? We know from the research that if you're being self-critical, it creates the same physiological response as if somebody else is being critical. So it puts you in a kind of fight or flight stress mode. And we know that when you're in that mode, it makes it harder to do everything that you're trying to do at work. So there's lots of impacts that it's having. And today I'm going to talk about the impact that it was having on me and how I actually came to do something about it. So the reason that I love doing this stuff with other people now is because I used to have like a rampant and extremely harsh inner critical voice inside my mind, and I don't so much anymore. And it has been a revelation for me. It's just been, life is just a lot better, and I can go at things a lot more confidently than I could before. And that's why I want to share it. And the other reason I want to share it is because people just don't talk about it. It's like this weird dirty secret that everyone experiences, but everyone doesn't share. So you start to think that it's just you that experiences this, and it's weird, and then you hide it, and then you don't get help with it, and it's just a horrible negative cycle. So I think possibly it is countercultural to be talking about the stuff that your brain says to you, because we're kind of, trained, not explicitly, but implicitly, because nobody talks about it, that you should keep it to yourself. And I just don't want to do that anymore. I'm sick of it. And I wish we lived in a world where people could actually say, look, my brain's giving me a really hard time about this. Here's what it's saying, and actually get some help with it. And I know how much that would help with people's confidence. So I go first, right? I have to go first, and I have to share my experience in the hope that it will benefit you and it will be good for you. So I start sometime in the 90s. I was born in 1984, and sometime in the 90s, I tried to put a timeline on this, right? And I'm going to go through this timeline from when I was a kid. I realised there's this voice in my head, this internal narrative, and that it says horrible things to me. And that sometimes it encourages me not to do things. Or when I am going to do things, it tries to scare the crap out of me before, and then it kind of maybe beats me up afterwards if there was something I got wrong or whatever. You know the drill. So because no one's ever talked to me about this, I assume, wrongly, but I'm a kid at this point, right? I assume that it's just me that hears this voice, and that somehow I'm very weird because of it, and I never tell anybody about it or tell anybody what it says. I also assume that all of the stuff that it says to me is automatically true, right? I never think to question whether the stuff it says is maybe a bit black and white, maybe a bit extreme. I just assume that it's true. Fast forward, and this is like a big gap here, but fast forward to June 2017. I attend a training course at this hotel in Camden. It's like we're overlooking the loch. It's really nice, beautiful day, beautiful room. And part of it is about working with this inner critical narrative. Now, when I saw this course, I was like, I didn't know that was a thing. By this time, I'm kind of knee deep in my career, right? I've already been a lawyer. I've already moved into the NHS. Yes, I've already moved to work in the NHS. And, I'm doing well in my career. I'm getting promotions. I'm putting myself out there. I've changed my career slightly. So I'm doing all the things in life, but I'm doing all of them with this pretty horrible narrative inside my head. And I see this course and I think, oh my God, perfect. Like, I'm going to give this a go. And in this training, and it was with a group called Inkling Group. They're based in Australia, actually, but they do stuff. I think they have open access stuff. So check them out. They're great. They teach me about my inner critic, and they tell me why it's there. And they explain that it's just part of a normal, functioning, healthy human brain, and that they lead me through some exercises designed to help me recognise when it's popping up, what it's saying to me, and all of that as a first step towards learning how to manage it. And this is like the first time anyone has ever, kind of stood in front of me and admitted that this is a thing that happens, that's normal, and told me there's actually something you can do about it. And I'm like, this is a fucking revelation to me. Why have I got to, I don't know how old I was at that point, I'm shit at maths, but why have I got to this age and not know this? But they ask me to write down exactly what my inner critic voice says to me. And I've got this I think I've actually saved it. I'll fish it out at home. But it's got, I can see the piece of notepad now. It's like hotel note paper. And I write down the list of the things that my inner critic says to me. And I finish, right? I get to the end of this little note page on the notepad. And I'm staring at this page. And it is horrendous. Seeing it actually written down in black and white, the shit that my brain says to me, is horrendous. It's awful, right? Shit you would not say to somebody that you really, really disliked. You just wouldn't. And I never would have done. But here I was, listening to this crap from my own brain all day, every day. And the next thing that happens, as if that wasn't enough, is that the perfect blonde woman, this woman called Sophie, who was taking the training, she seems like the most perfect woman in the world, stands up at the front and reads out the list that she wrote years ago when she did this exercise, and I am flabbergasted. She talks about how her inner critic says to her that she's boring and that nobody's going to like her and all of this, and I'm looking at this woman thinking, she must be the most perfect, one of the most perfect people you've ever seen. And yet, here is all the crap that voice in her brain is saying to her, and I'm like, oh my God, it's not just me. And also, as if she doesn't feel like she has to hide it and be ashamed of it. She's actually standing up in a room full of 50 people, saying out loud what the voice in her brain says to her. I'm amazed. She also tells us that the voice in her brain doesn't say this shit to her anymore. Yes, it still pops up, but it's not like it used to be. And I think, well, maybe if she's done it, I can do it too. And they asked me to create a character for my inner critic voice, right? And I still do this with clients. It's backed up by the research that if you kind of animate the voice of your inner critic, you can get a bit of what they call psychological distance. And basically what that means is you can kind of see it as something slightly separate from you so that you can notice when it's popping up and you can engage with it rather than just getting hooked into it and believing everything it says. And yeah. And I don't know why, but the character that pops to mind straight away is this guy, and he wears these like blue overalls and this red kind of shirt and a little cap, and he has like a sweeping brush. I don't know, he's a cleaner or so, a janitor or something, I don't know. And he like works in the bottom of a building and he just moans about shit all the time, or he's just really mean and rude. And yeah, to this day I have no idea. And I called him Brian. Again, I had no clue at the time why I called him Brian. But they tell me that I have to create this character, Brian, and then I will notice when Brian is popping up. So I'll notice when my inner critic voice is popping up. And I must learn how to soothe Brian, because Brian is a bit of me that's freaking out about stuff, that's worrying, all of that, right? He's not trying to make my life a misery. He's trying to kind of protect me from being exposed or being embarrassed or being ashamed or doing something that goes right out of my comfort zone. So whilst he's got some weird techniques of how he goes about trying to help me, he is actually trying to help me. So I have to learn how to help him so that he can calm the fuck down and stop giving me such a hard time. So I imagine myself like putting my arm around him and being like, okay, Brian, I know you think I'm going to mess this up and that's going to be terrible and that I'm going to lose my job and end up as an old bag lady and die alone. I know that's what you think. That's what you fear. But don't worry, Brian. Like, I've got this. I can do this. Right? So this is me creating Brian, this character, and then learning how to soothe him. And all through that summer of 2017, I'm getting to know Brian. And I notice every time that he pops up, which is a lot. But now I kind of have a way of thinking about him. I have a way of dealing with him. I have a way of interacting with him. And I remember one day, I'd been into Brixton on a Saturday, and it was a lovely, like, sunny Saturday. And I was walking home and I heard him just pop up and say something horrible. Don't even remember what it was now. Excuse me. And I remember this really distinctly because I remember saying, "Oh, hi, Brian. I didn't know you were going to be popping up today." And immediately, instead of just... what would happen before to me was I would hear this inner critical voice say some shit, and then I would immediately get hooked into it, and it would be like a negative spiral. But what happened there was it was almost like this circuit breaker. The critical voice says something, and I'm like, "Oh, hi, Brian. Didn't think you were going to be popping up today." Then I imagine myself putting my arm around him, and I just carry on walking. And I was like, wow, that's a lot different to what used to happen to me before. Now, I practice and practice and practice this, and I am diligent. I am like determined and diligent that this is going to help me, because I can see that this inner critical voice is actually having quite a big impact on my life. It's slowing me down, it's stopping me from doing things, and it's just generally making the experience of my life and my work a lot harder than I think it probably needs to be. So I carry on with this work of like talking to Brian and soothing him down and all of that. Like, I'm starting to know when he pops up, why he pops up, and how I can handle him. And, you know, it's going pretty well. Then in 2018, I get qualified as a coach. And I have this funny experience where the first day of my coaching training, everybody goes, I think there was like 8 of us, and everybody goes around and they say, "Oh, hi, I'm so-and-so, and I want to coach, you know, X type of people. I want to be a coach. I want to own my own business. I want to coach people who are like expats who live in different countries all over the world." Someone else is like, I want to coach and I'm going to be a sex coach. And someone else is like, I'm going to help people integrate after a plant medicine ceremony. And I'm like, oh, cool. And everyone's kind of going around and saying all their, you know, dreams and their ideas. And I'm thinking, I actually kind of want to be a full-time coach, but Brian is saying, yeah, the thing is, Anna, you're just not really one of those kinds of people who like leaves a corporate job and just goes to become a coach and runs her own business. He's like, you're not really one of those types of people. So all of these people in this room, like, I completely believed in them. I was like, yeah, that sounds cool. I'm sure you can be a sex coach and a plant medicine integration coach and an expat coach, right? But for me, I'm like, I probably can't do any of those things. So instead I say, oh, well, I'm Anna and I just want to do a little bit of coaching as part of my job, just do a couple of hours a week, something like that, which was a lie. But it was interesting. Then I start to get these regular coaching sessions. And one day I just decide to spill to the coach that I have this desire. I'm like, I would really love to do this like as a bit of a full-time thing. But I have this kind of horrible critical voice in my head that I call Brian. And he's like, you're just not one of those types of people. And to my amazement, this is the first time I've ever really admitted it to anybody personally. The woman who's coaching me doesn't seem to think I'm crazy. She doesn't seem to think I'm shameful at all. She just like gives me the time to talk about it. And, she keeps a straight face. And she helps me to think about whether Brian's actually right. And it was the first time that I've ever had the experience of actually challenging some of the things that Brian says. Now, in the past, I just took the stuff that Brian said to be gospel truth. I just thought it was a fact. If Brian's saying that I'm not one of those types of people, then that's just true. But she was like, well, yeah, but what if that's not actually true? And she really made me think, like, what is the evidence that, one, I am one of those types of people, and two, what does that even mean? What is this type of person thing? And I was like, oh my God, it's actually bullshit. It's actually bullshit. Which means that Brian's been saying stuff to me my whole life that I assumed to be true, and it's actually been bullshit. And I've just been accepting it as gospel truth. How many more things is he wrong about? How many more things that he says to me are actually worthy of a bit more investigation, a bit more like skepticism and testing? And I'm like, probably loads. So from that point on, I'm like, okay, I know how to handle Brian now when he pops up. I know how to soothe him. But what I also need to do is actually take a good, honest look at whether some of the things that he's saying and that he's always told me are even true, or whether they're just a load of shit. And guess what? Turns out most of them were a load of shit. So if you've got an inner critical voice in your head, you might, just like I did, just assume that everything they say is real and is true and is legitimate. No, 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 no. Every time I have a coaching session with someone almost, their brain has told them something that they tell me. And when we really forensically look at it, it's usually not the truth. Some of the times it's just complete wild fabrication. So that was another amazing moment for me. And when all this is going on, I think I've definitely got to teach people about this stuff, because I didn't know it. No one taught it to me. And I'm like, I've got to spread the message. I've like got to tell people. So in March 2019, I teach my first class about how to quiet your inner critic. And I use some of the tools that I was taught, but I also add on this other stuff that I've learned through coaching and through coaching myself and through getting coached and through working out how to kind of test what it says and all of the rest of it. So I also stand at the front of the class and read out the stuff that I wrote on that hotel note paper that my inner critic said to me. Just like that seemingly perfect woman who stood in the front of the class and told us what her inner critic said to her, I stood in the front of the class and I told them what my inner critic said to me. And I realised at that moment that the reason that I'd never told anyone any of the stuff that my inner critic said to me before was because I was ashamed. I thought it was shameful because I thought it was true. And that was like a revelation moment for me. And after I shared it, I was like, I'm no longer ashamed. I'm just human. So move on then to September 2019, there's another interesting incident where I'm trying on some jeans in a department store called Morley's in Brixton. And one of the sizes of jeans I've got don't fit me that well. They're too small. And Brian starts up like a train. Body shaming was one of his little favourite areas. And he was like, oh my God, you're so fat. Your thighs look so big in those jeans. You can't even put them on. Like, what the fuck? You're disgusting, blah, blah, blah. And I'm looking in the mirror at the eyes of a woman who's looking back at me. And she looks broken by that stream of consciousness. She looks just desolate and dejected. And I just thought, do you know what? I'm not having this anymore. Body shaming comments are out. End of story. Line in the sand. Done. That's it. Not happening anymore. Brian, that is the last time you ever do that. That is the last time I will ever make a body shaming comment, either out loud or in my head, to me ever again. I made the vow in that changing room. And you know what? To my utter amazement, Brian complied with these instructions. Now, occasionally he will come out with something around the edges, but as soon as my brain hears a body shaming comment, it stops it in its tracks, and it's like, we don't do that here. I imagine there's this little bouncer installed in my brain that's now in charge of policing for any type of body shaming comments that Brian might come out with. And no longer will they be allowed to take root, to take hold, and to kind of go down that, thought spiral. This is amazing. And it works. So now when I teach people about their inner critic, this is another thing that I help people to think about. Whether they've got a zero tolerance policy like I have around a certain area, whether they want to install a little bouncer in their brain, and it is amazing. Then at some point in 2020, I secretly start wondering if it's actually my work in the world to tell people about their Brian and to listen to the stuff it says to them and to make them feel less shame and less shit about the entire thing. I'm like, maybe that's actually what I've been put on this earth to do. And I consider calling myself the inner critic coach, but I don't quite dare go for it. And the most lols thing of the lot is that Brian insists that's a stupid thing to call yourself. I'm not sure if that's ironic because I'm always confused about the true meaning of irony, but maybe it is. Then shoot forward into May 2021. I'm coaching a lovely client and we're thinking about how when she's finding something really hard, she can kind of coach herself through it in the way that I would coach her through it. And she realises what she needs is some acknowledgement for how she's feeling. She needs to, get a bit of support and a bit of encouragement. And she could actually do this for herself. She could actually talk herself through this little quick process. And it would be like the opposite of the critical voice in her brain. She would intentionally be using, her own voice to say, do you know what? Come on. I know you're feeling a bit shitty about this, but we can definitely do it. Let's just take the first step and all of that. And she literally talks herself into the thing that she's going to do. And I'm like, this is fucking genius. So I developed this into a method, which I call the ARSE method, which does stand for something. I'll do another podcast on it another day. But I start intentionally using that voice where there used to be Brian. He was the voice that was in charge of everything. And then when Brian quietened down, there was just not so much at all. And then I realised at this point that just like my client, I actually needed to bring something else online intentionally, use my own voice to kind of fill the void that Brian had left behind. But not in a kind of shitty way, in a really good way, in a really supportive way, in a really encouraging way, in a way that would actually really help me. So that's what I did. And ever since then, I've been using this method to kind of talk myself around, listen to myself, help me feel emotions, help me when I'm finding something tough or when I've made a mistake. And it's unbelievable how soothing I find it. It's brilliant. Then, in December 2021, my friend Charlotte, my dear friend Charlotte, who's a writer, I'm telling her about Brian. And she's like, oh, Brian, I get it, because it's an anagram of brain. And I'm like, yes. I had never realised that. I was like, I never knew why I called him Brian. And there you go. So apparently, I'm calling him Brian because it's an anagram of brain. But I've never realised that before. So, there is the journey of me and Brian. Now, Brian still sometimes pops up. Not that often anymore, I have to say, but occasionally. But when he does, I don't fight with him, I don't hate him, I don't rail against him. I know how to handle him, I know how to calm him down, and I know how to kind of coach myself so that instead of using the crazy beating myself up way of dealing with things, I'm using a completely different method, which is to talk to myself in a different way. And my God, can I tell you, my life has changed. I'm no longer feeling like a prisoner to the stuff that Brian thinks I can or cannot or should not do. I can be so much more confident. I can be so much braver. I can be quicker doing things. I don't have to beat myself up afterwards. I tell you what is a revelation. Now, if you've got a Brian inside your head, whatever you call them, just know that I didn't manage to change my relationship with my Brian because I'm magical and special. I'm obviously not at all. I just said that I would, and then I kept going until I did. And I found out all kinds of magical things along the way. And I want the same for other people, because I wish somebody had sat me down when I was a kid and said, do you know what, Annie, you're going to have this mean voice in your brain and it's going to say shit to you. That shit mostly won't even be true. Don't think that it is. And also, here's how you handle it. But did anyone sit me down and have that conversation with me? No. Did any of my teachers? No. Did any of my caregivers? No. It took me going on a random course in 2017 to even find out this was a thing and that I could do anything about it. And now I'm determined to tell the world that it's possible. And you that it's possible. So, I hope you enjoyed that gallop through my brain and my Brian. If you want my help to work on this stuff, get in touch with me. I'll put some details in the show notes. When you work out how to deal with the voice in your brain and to deal with yourself very differently, my, how life can change. So, that's all that I've got for today. I will see you again in next week's episode. Until then, goodbye. I should have told you that next week, so if you're listening to this in real time, on the 27th of September 2022, I am teaching a masterclass about how to quiet your inner critic. This is going to be like a deep look with you, for you, about everything that's currently happening in terms of your inner critic and what you can do and apply the work that I applied to get yourself to a position where yours is quieted down so you can just live your life with more confidence and with more peace. I've put the details in the show notes. Click on the link if you want to come and join us. I promise you won't look back.